Many others do not also have access to books either in their countries or elsewhere. She admitted the project will take many years when she spoke to Africanews. It is a project of a lifetime, but she's not doing this all by herself. She's working with historians, researchers, etc. They have started in Ghana and will then move on to other countries. So it will take some time. Why is this of particular interest to me? Essentially because it will make it possible to restore Africa's linguistic and cultural heritage. The project will first enable Africans to have access to their history and the history of other countries. Because a Senegalese, for example, or a Mauritanian might not know the history or culture of Cameroon, just as a Zimbabwean or a Mauritanian might not know everything about Kenyan history or culture. But most importantly, the project will help to put an end to prejudice about Africa. Africa is not a country, it is a continent with different countries and varied culture. The history of Africa does not begin with colonization or slavery. It dates back thousands of years, and this is what this project will demonstrate. That is why this project is very important to me. Another highlight I'll remark on Hanan is the return of some of Benin's antiques. You may recall that Benin had asked France to return at least 5,000 objects that had been stashed away during the colonial era in Benin. But in response a few weeks ago, France said some of these assets are now part of French heritage. But Benin is not giving up. This issue is very important not only to Benin but also to other African countries. Why? Because several countries on the African continent, all the way to Southern America, for example, have seen their cultural artifacts which were taken away during colonization or during archaeological researches, some of which its legality is in doubt. These indigenous artworks are found in international museums. In France, for example, the Quai Branly Museum houses a lot of goods from Benin, and also the British Museum in London.
Okay, and from Benin, still in West Africa, I speak about Burkina Faso, the biggest film festival in Africa. So this is the FESPACO Film Festival. It turned out to be a very big event, and it's been described as Africa's biggest cultural event. Well, it turned out to be a success. Why am I saying it turned out to be a success? Because about 1,000 subscriptions were made for this year as compared to the previous years. Because the previous years, just a few subscriptions were being made. But this year, it was very big, and so many media houses covered the event, and many female film directors were honored. It was such a great event, and even there were different categories that were added in this films festival. For example, the Thomas Sankara Prize. Yeah, but the ultimate winner, of course, was Alain Gomis, the Senegalese film director, for his movie, what was the name? Félicité. Yeah, that is the movie that won this year's award. So looking forward for next year's event. And generally speaking, we cover a lot of things here on This Is Culture in Africanews, because we have we talk about, as I said, the cultural events. We also have, apart from the cultural events, we also talk about the deep cultural values of the African continent. For example, we've talked about the Maasai ornaments. We've talked about henna tattoos in Africa. The headscarves, for example, how to tie the headscarves for those people who still don't know how to tie the headscarves. So there's so many things, and even we talked about, just recently, we talked about the dances that the African continent has, and sure, there are so many. We spoke about the Inore dance, Baganda dance, Indlamu dance of the Zulu community in South Africa. So there are so many, and of course we're going to give you more of these dances because there are so many. And yeah, so This Is Culture in Africanews is the place to be, and really the place to always be on every Monday from 6:45 a.m. local time, Congo, Pointe-Noire.
Merci beaucoup, Lynette, Barbara, pour tous ces éclairages.
Thanks to you both, Lynette and Barbara. I am sure we will continue to follow your works in the coming weeks on the Morning Call with This Is Culture segment.
Culture. Of course.
Well, Aldous Huxley once said technological progress has merely equipped us with more efficient ways of progressing backwards. But as we move forward in Africa and the rest of the world, we can say some technology has actually placed us somewhere better than where we were yesterday.
Africa is an emerging hotspot for technology due to its growing population and savvy youth. technology has evolved in the continent, ranging from the days of the pyramid to the current days when the continent is competing with the rest of the world. Africanews has designated a program called SciTech to cover the unknown, the known, and the popular technological devices in the continent. SciTech has covered issues and topics such as the Note 7 explosion. Also, we covered the Pokemon Go craze in the world. And back to the continent of Africa, we covered technologies that were used during the elections in Ghana, as well as a Namibian boy who created a mobile device that can make phone calls without a SIM card. This is how far Africa has gotten to in terms of technology, and SciTech is here to stay. Let's look at how far we've come with the program over the year.
For the past 1 year, during our intervention in the morning call, we look out for stories, technological developments or inventions, or the discovery of applications which have an impact on the African continent, whether they're invented by Africans or they're invented by Europeans or Americans. We try to look at the impact on Africa. But at the same time too, we know that most of the time people don't report about inventions which have been done by Africans. For example, whether it is the development of a Christian social network in Ghana, be it the discovery of cancer Googles in Nigeria, or new apps for pregnant women in Nigeria. But those are some of the things that sometimes people don't report about. And so we at Africanews, those who present the high-tech segment, we try to lay emphasis on this. This can be done through the presentation of straight news stories on technological inventions or applications. It can also be done sometimes during segments when we decide to dig deep on a particular issue. Just to say here that, as you know, technology is already dominating the world, and Africans too are already getting involved fully in technology because, as you know, a few weeks ago, when Forbes published the list of billionaires, out of the list we had about 183 tech billionaires, and the person who tops the list is a tech billionaire. So we try to make sure that in whatever we do, we look for inventions of applications and other inventions related to technology which have an impact on the African continent.
Now, according to all the organizations that rate economic growth, the IMF, FDB, the United Nations, even the World Bank, you can name them, the economic growth forecast for the continent over the coming years is expected to be lower than the 5% average of the past decade. Kigali, Rwanda, we saw, hosted the World Economic Forum towards the end of the year, while the United States President Barack Obama, before leaving office, visited the continent, giving momentum to the Africa is on the move phrase.
To get a better understanding of the stakes of the African economy, Stéphane Cogné and Jean-David Mahamale is our guest.
Eh bien, pour ce qui est du fond, qu'il me soit permis de...
Starting from the list, permit me to situate the spirit of this chronicle in a factual approach in a journalistic universe characterized by the post-factuality.
Pour ambition de planter le...
This chronicle has the ambition of shaping major current issues in the economy of the continent, more than it has ever been confronted with. That is to embrace non-liberalism. That is to say, the image of the victory of the VCR, as said by Francis Fukuyama. The journalistic observation in the sense of history is materialized by a thematic adopted declination. Africa in the face of globalization, relations between Africa and its major partners through the chronicle, relations between India, Africa, or even Japan, Africa that can draw the continent. Reduce the train of life of the state in Africa, the problem of social security on the continent, peace and development in Africa, food security in Africa, etc. And then there is a rigorous organization could lead to a second aspect of a rise in editorial range, with a systematic introduction of experts giving the floor to men of science on the continent, while keeping the necessary decline.
We will notice as well other brilliant works of the world-renowned Professor Philippe Hugon or Joan-Joseph Ballot, an editorial power which has contributed to his modest level to dissemination now extended to the chronic business and other chronicles of the chain from the beginning to the end of the evening of the day where they are produced. Journalistically, we are impressed by the reactions of viewers, particularly that of a Nigerian who sent us a message on Facebook protesting the naming of the militants of the separatist movement in the Niger Delta as terrorists, and by the resumption of other internet sites and the videos of the chronicle posted on internet, without mentioning many other followers who have not ceased in adding comments on Twitter. Just as we always have it in memory, the number of vehicles made by Africans entitled Boom of the Automobile in Africa, all elements which may have been allowed here, viewers holding the ultimate sanction, all the elements we may therefore be allowed to return in history.
As you know, the year 2016 was marked by a fall in oil prices, more so to the African economy. We must also stress the efforts made towards economic diversification, like for instance, Angola and Nigeria. And remember, they are the two major oil producers on the continent. It is also important to raise the efforts made by other African countries to try to exit this crisis. Countries from North Africa have put a particular emphasis to help countries that are in economic crisis within the region. For instance, Egypt has set the path when it organized a conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, which every year welcomes Africa decision makers. On the other hand, Algeria even organized at the end of the year the first African Forum for Investment. Then Morocco goes even further. It proposes to join ECOWAS, that is the Economic Community for West African States. But the disappointment comes primarily from Central Africa, which seems to be preparing, while a special summit convened by Cameroon in December had highlighted the poor state of health within the sub-region. There is now reason to be optimistic. In 2040, Africa will have approximately 240 million people living within the middle class. And now here, 5 years, the reforms will have transformed the African economy. This crisis can be bad or good at the same time.
Ah voilà fiston, merci beaucoup, c'est parfait. En dehors des éclairages de nos journalistes économiques,
our team of economic journalists in the last 12 months have made it a point to honor our viewers with impartial and factual information supported by the insights of a large number of experts and correspondents. Here are the highlights.
par téléphone.
Thank you for joining us.
Écoutez sa réponse.
De soutien des forces qui combattent l'islamisme.
Les participants ont également appelé à élargir le dialogue.
D'apartheid social et culturel.
Un consensus plus large.
Donnez-nous votre sentiment sur ce scrutin.
Une démonstration de la démocratie.
Well, so here at Africanews, we've taken tours here and there, trying to just see how the travel industry is for Africans. We've also seen the African Union launching a plan for the African visa for every African by the year 2020. Something sort of the Schengen visa for Europeans. Well, let's move away from that and talk to our journalists and just ask them what they really remember and what's going to leave a mark ever since we started this Pan-African channel, Africanews.
Elaine and Afulake, you are the faces of the travel segment on the morning call. You have made our viewers discover African destinations hitherto unexplored, delivering useful travel plans. You also highlighted current events that have had a significant impact on the tourism sector. What do you remember of these episodes?
Well, and actually a lot has happened in the world of travel and tourism in 2016. Some of the good news we've had is the introduction of the African Union electronic passport during the African Union Summit in July. So it was issued to some heads of states and some senior officials. You would know that about 55% of Africans still require visas to go to other African countries. So the aim behind here is to facilitate the movement of African people within the continent. So hopefully by 2020, we'll have more people having this electronic passport. Still on Kigali, Kigali has been on the highlight, Rwanda to be precise. Kigali, for example, was named the 4th fastest growing airport in 2016. And more on that, it was even named the most attractive city in eastern part of Africa. And we all know that Kigali is one of those green cities that has that lovely hills that adorns this aesthetic urban space. It's considered as one of the safest and one of the cleanest. Over the past few years, we had some conferences, eminent conferences that was held in this city. Some of them is the African Union Summit, the World Economic Forum on Africa, the Global African Investment Forum, and some other high-level meetings that was held here. More good news, we had, there was a joint agreement between Kenya, Uganda and Rwanda to have a joint visa, tourist visa, to aid the movement of people or tourists within this region, just like we have in West Africa. The only difference here is just that we don't require a visa, we just have a passport to show for it.
Well, for me, I must say the most interesting part of doing travel is actually to just update people on their travel logs. Choosing the perfect destination might not be easy, as you know. There's a lot of good places to see in the continent. There's amazing gourmet to be had. And there's so much actually to just do in Africa. Whether we take you to the Beve Islands of the Madagascar or to the white sandy beaches in probably Mozambique, or even the safaris in the east part of the continent, we get to explore all these places, albeit not physically just yet, but you get to learn a lot along the journey with you. One of my most remarkable and eye-opening destinations was actually when I had the opportunity to do the sights and sounds of Congo. Congo has a lot of potential to earn in terms of tourism, but it still hasn't been tapped into. And I remember I did a feature on it, and some of my colleagues who are even Congolese were actually asking, do you mean that particular destination is in Congo? And I was like, yes, it is. So they were very fascinated to know that actually there are beautiful touristic places here in the country. Another interesting topic is definitely when Benin decided to follow suit in Rwanda's direction. The country has made true of its words a few months back after announcing Africans from visiting the West African nation will be able to visit the nation without having visas. The government scrapped short-stay visas for 31 countries. And for future plans on travel, we also want to highlight historic sites and also probably have theme months in the coming few days. I'd like to explore transport. Of course, when it comes to travel, you have to transport, whether it's going to be taking a road trip or maybe even going through with the trains. And we've had Morocco's fast high-speed train, which was is the fastest to operate in Africa, which was launched just this year. And we also have Ethiopia and Djibouti's fast, fully electrified cross-border railway, and also Kenya's standard gauge railway. Those are just a few things that we want to highlight in the coming months in travel.
Well, the world of sports is huge. As of 2014, internationally recognized genres of sports stood at around 442. Well, that's a lot of champions.
Effectivement, Robert. Exactly, Robert. When you speak of sports on Africanews, Wahani Johnson Sambu and Victor Moisio can't be left out of the conversation. Hello, Wahani. Hello, Victor.
Bonjour, Hanan. Bonjour, Robert.
Good morning.
Alors, parlez-nous des moments. What were some of the highlights of the African and international sports news?
It was a memorable year, very rich and varied in sports news. And as I'm a fan of football, I will begin with the football. Speaking of it, we had a very important event just a few months in Africa. We had the African Cup of Nations contested in Gabon and was won by Cameroon. It was unlikely all that the indomitable Lions were not expected at this stage of the competition. They likely got into the quarterfinals and later also got into the final. During the final against Egypt, a team that is really respected in Africa, they led by 2-0 and succeeded in reversing the cycle. That was one of the most memorable highlights in sports this year, more so here in Africa. But then there is also another sports news which is quite memorable during the year. This concerns CAF presidential election, and it was a historical election indeed, Victor.
Oui, vraiment. And it was actually a big year with big moments and complete with big events in the world of sports. Right from Leicester's, historic fairy tale win of the EPL title, and to, like you said, the AFCON 2017 victory by, the Cameroon. But for me, the major highlight during that year was the toppling of Issa Hayatou from the helm of, CAF's top seat by the Malagasy Ahmad. That was a great moment in African football, and hopefully this means, it's going to be a fresh breath to African football in the continent.
And then, Victor, other landmark news this year was on the Euro. The Euro competition was won by Portugal, and this was through Cristiano Ronaldo in France. The Portuguese surprised France with a score of 1-0, goal score at the end of the extra time by Eda. We talked about him because Eda is of African origin. He's a Guinea-Bissau, a small country in the West Africa. We also talked about France team, which actually, after losing to Portugal, it made Cristiano to enter into history book since he lacked an international award as a player within the national team. This helped him endeavor both his career and success. And of course, he regained his image bearing issues that surrounded him. And also, this kid also consoled him. Personally, it moved me.
Yes, and of course, being a strong and staunch rugby supporter, especially in the Sevens rugby, I've got to say that, that moment when Kenya Sevens won the, the HSBC World Series in 2016 in Singapore, it was a huge moment for our country. Being Kenyan, it makes it very huge for me. We had to wait for 140 games in the series to take this title home, and we became the first country after South Africa to win the title.
Ça a été également une fierté pour nous, Victor, ici à Africanews, d'avoir vu.
This has also been a source of pride for us here, Victor, here at Africanews, to have this Kenyan team despite the hiccups during the Olympic Games in Rio. Updates from Rio, precisely the legend Usain Bolt. We could not finish without talking about him, We who completed his Olympic career at a high note in Rio. We could talk about other stories on sports here on Morning Call and on Africanews. But stay connected. We are only in our first anniversary, and we hope to relive other intense moments of sport in Morning Call, Football Planet, and all other emissions on Africanews, your Pan-African channel.
Well, it's been fun here at Africanews, always giving you those nice and somewhat conflicting stories across the continent. Your Pan-African channel, Africanews, it gets better and better every day. But anyway, we want to leave you with a series of caught unawares on camera, just so you can spice up your morning.
Exactly, but there were some moments that should also get you laughing.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Come on, man.
On dirait que c'est de prendre au Congo.
L'Afrique. Pas du tout.
De là, non. C'est lui.
Just hold on a minute, please.
Il est où le truc?
Today is a Friday, hallelujah.
Là, anglais, femme d'abord ou ouais?
Attendez, on va recommencer. Ça va.
A private television channel in Tunisia accused of taking money to denigrate the work of an NGO, iWatch.